as I said, this is right after the mountaintop experience. He sees fire from heaven. It starts to rain. Yahweh is vindicated. Elijah is vindicated. And he goes into depression. And so, that's real. And so I can relate with that. And I think we've all, maybe, we've all been through these really high highs. And sometimes, or really tense situations, either at work, we're in a meeting or something like that. And, we're fighting for what's right. And we leave and we just feel like, man, do I have to keep doing this? What is going on? It's like, do I really want to be here? Do I really want to work here? And you're just kind of ready to give up on this. It's like, you take the sword, you take it over here, and then you leave just feeling completely done. And in this case, the aftermath of Mount Carmel, I think one lesson is that we all were down physically and emotionally. In Elijah's case, he was at the end of his rope and ready to give up. He said, Lord, kill me, I'm done. And if we can just, think about that statement for a minute. This is the Almighty, the powerful God who he hears from, he sees happening, and he's like, King of the universe, I'm not with you anymore. We're done. We're done. I'm not with you. I want to die. I mean, that's a pretty powerful thing to say to a God who you ultimately respect, and he does that. But I really want us to, more than that, I want us to see God's response, because I think that's really vital here. So in that story we read, so there was a couple ways that God responded here. He fed Elijah and let him sleep. He didn't come back and say, Elijah, what are you talking about? What's going on? Let's go, He wasn't demanding. He was like, sleep. Don't worry about people coming after you right now. I got you. You're going to sleep, and then I'm going to wake you up and send an angel. I'm going to feed you. And don't worry, just keep sleeping. I know you're exhausted. I got you. So God was a friend to Elijah. So God's a friend. And I think it's important to notice that. The next thing, wow, pretty important. I mean, if you can kind of overlook this, but the end of that, what he read, he calls Elisha. This is a guy who's been alone, taken all the responsibility on himself. He's been afraid. We just talked about earlier, being alone and like having to being this man and being the guy, the focal point. God says, don't worry. I'll put your responsibilities on him. You won't be alone anymore. You now have a companion. I mean, that's a pretty good guy. That's a pretty good friend there, I think we would say. So he gives him a companion. He says, go train up Elisha. Because you've done your job. I mean, he wasn't through with Elijah, but he says, you've done what I asked you to do. I'm going to take care of you now. So that's important. And another thing I think is important to note is another thing God does for Elijah is, later on we find out, how you probably know that you've heard the story about Elijah being taken up in the chariots of fire. He avoids the agony of death. God doesn't make this man die. And that's a pretty bold statement of his life. For all that Elijah's done, for all that God and Elijah have done together, for the relationship they built, God's like, I got you. I'm going to give you a companion on this earth. And by the way, don't worry about death. Everybody else worries about death. You don't. No, I'm taking you home. That's a pretty strong relationship. Awesome. So we go through depression. We feel really down. We want to die. We want to quit. And Paul said, what's it Paul? In the New Testament says, do not be weary while doing that kind of thing. And I think we've all been there. But we've got a God who is our friend.
And the foundation is shifting from underneath your feet. Know that he's there.
Another thing that struck me here, can anybody remember anybody else in the Bible who went through this kind of exhaustion?
Jesus was pretty weary before he was arrested.
Yeah, Jesus in his third year of ministry was getting away and praying, away from his disciples, away from the people a lot more, because he was pretty weary. So I think God understands, right? I think God understands. He experienced it.
Yeah.
So he gets it. And finally, let's talk about the compensation now. So for all of this, you meet the qualifications, you understand your responsibilities if you're a prophet, and what comes from that? What's the pay? What's the compensation? Number one, a strong relationship with the Almighty. I mean, no doubt about it. God was his friend. He was God's friend. We talked about all the things that he was blessed with. Number two is supernatural experiences. Can you imagine? He raises a widow's child from the dead. Jesus raised Lazarus. Elijah raises the child. I mean, pretty supernatural. He calls down fire from heaven. Extremely supernatural. He rides a chariot into heaven. So number two is supernatural experiences. Number three, compensation, which you get when you're a prophet, is kingdom, sometimes even historical greatness. So we're still talking about Elijah and his great and miraculous, amazing story. So he's known, and he's revered in the Middle East. And number four, and I think this is as important as all of them, he leaves a legacy. I think, so as human beings, we build businesses, we do things, we're disciplined, we sacrifice. And what we don't want to see is that those investments and those sacrifices just die when we're gone. We like to pass those on to our kids, that all our life's work and his legacy was with Elisha. In fact, Elisha was a greater prophet than Elijah. Can you imagine that? The guy you train up is better than you. I mean, that's a pretty good legacy. The Bible says, 2 Kings 2, 9 through 10, when they had crossed, this is the end, Elisha's about to be taken off. When they had crossed, Elijah said to Elisha, "Tell me what I can do for you before I'm taken away." And Elisha turns and says, "Let me inherit a double portion of your spirit." And Elijah says, "You've asked a difficult thing, but if you see me when I'm taken away from you, it'll be yours." And actually, his very cloak was left. Elisha picked it up, and the Spirit of the Lord was with him, and he became an even greater prophet than his master Elijah. So, in terms of compensation, I don't think it gets better than that. So in conclusion, the question is, where do each of us fit in the kingdom? We're not all prophets. We're not all Elijahs, but we do have a role. And so Elijah was a prophet. What are our job descriptions? And it's my heart that everybody here finds that out. Or at least we're on that journey to find that out. And so 4 steps to do that. So here's the application and the 4 things you can take away. Number 1, you got to be saved. You got to be in the kingdom, okay? We have to have a relationship, so that's basic. I think we all get that. You got to be saved. Number 2, consult with God in prayer. You need to ask him. He knows the plans he has for us. He knows who he made us to be. And we just ask him. And we read his word, which is number 3, and allow him to reveal it to us through his word. And how I've seen this play out myself is that I'm reading a passage in the Bible, I'm reading a story in the Bible, and I start to identify with the character. And I'm like, man, I felt that way. I think that way. I talk that way. And I'm starting to identify with somebody, whether it's Peter, or whether it's Paul, whether it's David. And you're like, our personalities might be a little bit similar. And so you start getting this idea of, well, this is how God used him. And maybe it's going to be similar for you, but just in your time. So you start to identify with characters. Maybe it's Elijah. Maybe you have the role of a prophet. And then number 4, this is a method I personally used. And if you could bring up your last slide. This is called place. So this was offered by a church I went to. This is called Place. What they do, there are dozens of these, by the way, but this is the one I used. They go through a series of profiling. They profile your personality, your spiritual gift assessment, so you can figure out what spiritual gifts that you have. You look at your experience path, because they believe that you can look at your path till now, that God has been shaping you. And then you look at your internal passions.
Sorry.
No problem. So you look at your internal passions. So one of the things that I loved when I learned that some of the things that we desire so heavily about, are in fact the moving of the Holy Spirit in us. Hey, Pastor Andy, welcome back. So this was key for me, because I always thought, those things that just burned in me, those things I really, it was like, I thought sometimes in this world I had to like suppress those. When I first, when I was younger, I'm like, oh man, these passions I have, I need to suppress them because I need to be responsible. I need to be things. But God put those in our hearts for a reason, because those are like our compass. He's trying to tell us, I got something for you. I got something for you. You love it, and I know I'm gonna give that to you. So this is place. Like I said, there's dozens of these out there. But that's a real great step to figure out what your spiritual gifts are, what your specific role is. So with that, I conclude, and I appreciate your attention.
Great job, man.
Great
Very
job.
good job. And that dovetails nicely with that message coming this week. Right, spiritual gifts, right?
Yeah, I'm just going to steal all that.